Hi, I'm Seamless, and it will definitely be Thursday by the time anyone sees this. It's only 13 or so minutes until it's Thursday for me, but it is time, or was time, for a new viewer track review video. I'm just going to go right into it today. Coming up next, or rather first, we have Inside Out by Velutz. 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 Anywho, let's see what this is like. Start us off with our first track today. Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. always love that reverb bit crush fade out combo. It's an excellent way to get yourself out of a noise of any kind. All right, so I've noticed in the last couple of videos what I tend to do is that I'll pick an element of the first track that is kind of like my reference for a way a thing was done that I'll compare to the rest of the tracks. And once or twice that I've ever actually had a reference at all for real that wasn't one of these tracks, that sort of ended up being the case anyway. So today, this one, yeah, having heard this, my thing that I'm going to use this to reference as a thing well done is actually going to be something specific. It's the progression. Now, oh boy. So this track was great. Like what this was and like mixed hit was like, wonderful. But the thing that it really nailed super well was its ability to be the very like kind of low key, not super complex version it was. But it changed. It changed all the time. It constantly came up with new little variations and little bits to the point where what was happening at the end was not totally the same. And this is important because it's easy enough to just change what you're doing, just do a different thing. But what's hard to do is to do it in a way that progresses, that moves forward in a way that makes the listener feel like they have not just like they're not just somewhere else, but that they're progressing. Like they're walking down a hallway, not that every time they take a step, they're in some completely new dimension, which is not necessarily bad. That could be a fun kind of thing to do. But in my experience, it's usually best to do the fun house thing where you are planning to take them somewhere weird and not that you're just leaving another chance for it to work out. To some people who are just by their nature nichely programmed to like the thing in the order the way you have it. And that's pretty much the reason why that stuff works. But this as a thing, the reason why it's impressive is because it doesn't go very far. It doesn't change very much at all. It is a very straightforward, steady path that doesn't get boring. And that's incredibly impressive because that's usually the thing that is boring. When you know enough more about where a thing is going that you just like aren't interested. And even though the technical description of what this song was is basically the same every second of the song, it still moves forward in a way that you could tell you were moving forward, and that that at the same time you still knew where you were going. Isn't that something? That's why this track rocks. I tried to say is rad and rocks at the same time and ended up saying racks. Sure, I guess. But yeah, that's the thing about this track that I enjoy. And what I'm gonna use this now as the reference when we look at other tracks to talk about how well they progressed whatever it is they did for their songs. So also this track like did the industrial thing quite well. By the time we got through this, I thought to myself, it's real interesting to see someone do the kind of industrial content training like build up. That's a little bit what these are. Like I refer to them before as DJ intros, but this isn't quite a DJ intro, is it? You can kind of see the sections be what they are, but they're not timed or separated or passed in a way that would normally. A DJ a DJ for spinning this stuff would have to still like cut and mix in this a little bit like with work versus what like a normal DJ intro would be. And the reason why this is not the same as that is because like while this is the main content of the track, what this does is it trains a person to kind of be ready for this to be what you're looking at. So that by the time you get here, you're familiar with the shape of the hallway. This is particularly difficult. Whew. When I'm making songs and I'm making drops, in the past I would always say that like I would just prefer to make a roll of only drops. And like yeah, if I know what my hallway is, I don't care about the training. It's not interesting to me. I don't need to be trained. I am familiar with it. I can't do that to myself. But what the intro is for everyone else. It's when you do because what these kinds of things end up being, industrial stuff and like 90s trancey sort of sourced things. It's a bunch of stuff on a bunch of stuff, and if you just turn on the bunch of stuff from nothing, you will have no idea what's happening. But if you start from nothing and build one day at a time, you are trained to know what's happening. So that's why that. And this is still important for this sort of thing, and I'm only bringing it up because I used to be a bit confused about certain genres of music that would also do this, certain breakbeat genres, that when they would do this intro, because I wasn't, it's just the genre that I got into first, I didn't see that as something like segmented like this is. I saw it as part of like the experience in a sort of like story cinematic way, and not as just that thing's version of what an intro is for every genre that has intros. which is to be a training for what's coming next, or to be a dick and train someone for something completely different and then give them something they don't expect when it comes to be what they expect to happen. Which, like, that's several genres right there, just to be fun, right? That's just the thing people like about it. So that's the differences between them there. It'll be interesting to see that discussion when we see what's up in other tracks. So let's see what's next. Up next, we have Deep Space, Burrito. It's called Deep Space, and the artist's name is Burrito. Wow. Huh. It looks kind of like just like this is kind of like a whale and a bigger whale. All right. Let's have a go. That was a fun collection of stuff there. So let's take this from the progressive angle on what we just sort of talked about, re-intros and stuff. So this was interesting just because it didn't train you for some of the bigger elements. This is the thing that came in and the beat that came in and the bass. All of that was special and separate, but the kind of main thing was there. Which was also in its different form. It was in the lower form. So what's neat about this is that it was using kind of the weapon of education against you, like a joke almost, or a pun, by setting up an expectation and then subverting it, which is fun. Neat thing to do. And it's also the saving grace for when you aren't having a good way to merge one thing and another. But this is not that. This is definitely a very well done connection of this content with a beat, which is usually the question and the thing to do. And it's a bit like a remix. I was thinking, because of the bells, right? It reminded me a lot about when the Avengers Age of Ultron was new. Because that was right about when they got, was that when they got bought by Disney? Was that before or for Avengers? I forget, but the point of bringing it up is that they had in the trailer that I don't have strings on me, and there ain't no strings, the Pinocchio song. And they did that, they did the creepy melody version of it, where they played their melody real slow and then put epic strings behind it, as a progression. And it's sort of this, as if this melody were that kind of thing. It was treated with that subversion of being you don't expect it to be the lead line on this big epic progression because it's not what it was before. That sort of, and this style being present at all in this context, hip hop and whatnot, it's all samples and records and stuff, right? That stuff used to just be that. When you heard these kinds of jazzy xylophone, and then someone made up a cut of and then linked it with a beat, and then cool, there it is, the style. Good stuff. This was a fine time overall. Mix was okay. I felt the bass hit nicely, and you can see it's nice and solid. Like when I get at people sometimes about separating subs and whatnot, when I'm not even really looking that it ever was separated. Like you don't necessarily have to if you don't have to, and you don't have to when it ends up looking like this. Although this is usually what I separate a sub with. In fact, it seems like the overall 808 construction was short kick and long sub, which is the way to do it. It's the way to be clean, and it worked out nicely. So good gerbs, Burrito in deep space. Coming up next is Floods by Fusekit. Let us hear a dealio. That was a fun boop into a bunch of directions. Pardon me while I make sure my mic wasn't just panned to the left the whole time. All right, so this had an interesting twist, I say, because this first half had a bunch of sort of not necessarily predictable elements, but it felt very normal, which wasn't really a bad thing, because what it felt to me was kind of like a mega version of the commercialized kind of light beat type music that I hear out of the Adventure Timey Steven Universe side of things. And the difference between this and that is that stuff doesn't try to be hard. It doesn't try to have a beat that hits. And it tries to be all that light, fluffy, and neat. And there's versions of, like, those Future Bass and whatnot that also does this, but does the light, fluffy thing also hard. But you don't tend to hear one with a hard beat with the same kind of light, fluffy that stuff has. But this did. And that was cool. Like, the commitment to the tone of that texture was a neat twist. Or that is just a kind of a darker than usual edge. But that variation very well worked for it. Like, that there's ways to throw around the saws and have the plucks to do the thing, but having a power discrepancy and a power contrast is difficult. To have a light textured, sort of easier musical feeling, but while having hits, and so on and so forth. So good job making that work, because it did. Progression wise, this is also one of these very like training up kind of deals, and the complexity thing is sort of the angle, and complexity can come from a number of different directions, but it mostly just is how many different things can you tell are happening at once. It could be a beat in the music, it could just be the music itself could be that complicated, it could be a sound design from moment to moment that's just different, so hard. Like, the difference could be in literal just like the transfer of harmonics from one note to the next. Some of the most complicated, like difficult to decipher music doesn't move from the root note. And how can that be that simple if the main element of it is so complicated? And it's because it's just where the complication is. And this element can have complication in the musical sense, and then you just have to have that be the thing you're training. If you want someone A to access it at the level you are, and then B to have a hope at accessing it further enough to like actually get the whole picture. Something that, like, if you ever listen to something and you like listen to it again and you find new things, that's most people. That's mostly what it's like to consume this stuff, and that's what people are going to be like when they listen to your thing. They didn't get the whole thing the first time. How could they? Especially, it's not like people are dumb or whatever. It's that like there's only so many things we can concentrate on more than 1 second, and how do you know what they chose to focus on? And it's only going to be the one thing at a time. So every time through, something else different. Sometimes I'm trying to be all wishy-washy about it, just because it's true that I'm saying like all these things have certain impacts, but I don't really want to give you the idea that you could be totally in control of the results. Insofar as a person's experience listening to your stuff, like we try to make it work, and the conventions that we have around doing things, like just the beat architecture, how many times things happen, and at what rate they happen. The fact that we hang around certain averages is mostly like because we have tried enough things that we just average around stuff that we know sounds good, and that's why we're doing this way, because that's how familiar we are with it working, with the goal being that we communicate an interesting statement. The interesting statement moments are the moments that are interesting to us, the producers, who are like, yeah, we don't really want to do drops or whatever, but that's kind of like a scientist who comes around and just wants to shout the thing they found out, but no one else is gonna know what they're talking about unless they run us through the whole stack. So that when we finally get to the drop, we're just like, oh, that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing to people. But yeah, good jurors. Coming up next, we have Perennial by Raincity. Look at damn sections. And a big ol' whatever that is. Okay. We'll find out. Would that be interesting?
Going on. I was just not in it at all, even still then.
rad. This really reminded me of music from a group or an individual from a long time ago called Bitstream Dream. Did works for Need for Speed, I think, and Burnout, maybe. That might have been where I got it from originally. A lot of music that I got and discovered were video game soundtracks that I liked a lot, and a lot of the beats. I'm realizing, especially over time, that a lot of my genre confusion is mostly from freaking sound director genre confusion, trying to make video game music in the 90s and early 2000s. But anyway, point of this track, point of me listening to this track is that there was a lot of neat textures in here that reminded me of some of that stuff, which is cool because I really like when there's modern adaptations of older stuff. And it's especially neat when it scans fully, because what that actually means is that it's way better. Because if we actually heard the original content that I'm thinking of and compared it directly to this, it probably wouldn't be louder or better or hit harder, but also not like be better for the fact that it doesn't. As you can see in the sort of in the waveform in this track, it's actually this looks like a fairly dynamic experience. Wow, that's actually crazy dynamic. But that was mostly the case for stuff like that back then. But I don't know that they did that by choice. And perfectly honest, this could be more than this, obviously. But I dug the presence more. I wish I could think of a track from Bitstream Dream what any of them were called. I'm pretty sure one of them was called Falling. And that might have been the one I'm thinking of because there's a bit of a vocal kind of tinge to it, and the progression is also somewhat similar. So the bell presence on this was actually kind of cool. I dug that as a texture too, which also reminded me of the whole thing. It's very triggered. I would not be too surprised to find out that you knew who I was talking about, because that. Oh, I also wouldn't be surprised to be like, if you're just like, I have no idea. I just came here and did this. I'm like, yeah, nice, good job. It also vaguely reminds me of Massive Attack. Teardrop. Is that what the name of that song? The intro to House before they changed the intro to House. Old stuff. Anyway, this was cool. Thank you, words and order of words that form language and sentences. Oh my. There's not a whole lot else to say about this, just because it is so very it doesn't seem unmastered, because I'm not totally sure that this content should be pushed too much harder than this. But I'm always down to try, when I'm doing this kind of thing. Oh boy, that had been a weakness my whole life producing. From day one, when I would try to make anything, and I had a mentor who would give me advice about stuff, and he would try to tell me to do things like, don't make a beat, don't make it super loud or whatever. But I would end up making this really cool background texture that I was just like, it needs a beat. It would sound so cool with a beat. And I just would. So it doesn't matter how good something like this would sound the way that it is, I would try. It might not always work. But yeah, good job. Coming up next, we have Decente Tetante by KAS or Kaz. Another somewhat dynamic looking track. Let's see what you're like. Neat. So, there is an artist a while back, maybe still. I actually have no idea how old that guy was, or when he did whatever he did, but dude named Philip Glass. And the particular style of music he was known for, is what it boiled down to essentially, was that he took the effect of a delay and would write it down as notation for individual instruments to play. Like, if you can imagine a delay module, like if you can think of like an 80s music video where a guitarist hits a note and then an echo, and then you see like ghosts of him hitting the note appear next to him. Like that, only literally in real life, there's actually that many people doing that, and they're kind of just proceeding, playing the line down the line, and that the effect is the music. So I don't really know what inspired that guy to do that, or how old enough again he was to be around before or after delay modules, but it's entirely possible he heard the effect of a delay module and either didn't know what it was or knew what it was and concluded that he could replicate it this way without having the hardware or how, or did not know and assumed that players were doing that and just thought, sure, let's do this. I'm bringing this up because this beginning part actually had a really nifty texture to it. Time stretchy kind of nature, right? So contrast that with the ending here. This sound. See, that sounds more obviously time stretched, but this doesn't sound time stretched at all. And it very well could be. And like it might be reversed, just whatever. Like I don't know what the layer situation is. There's 1,000 ways you can arrive at this point, but the result is interesting. Because if you didn't know time stretching was a thing, and you heard something like a pulse stretched whale do whatever, or like that 900 times slowed down Dead Mouse tracks, or what was that? What did they do it to? Justin Bieber tracks? But the point is that that's kind of what this sounds like. But what this also sounds like is a bunch of synths and things just timed and arranged to do this. And you totally could do that. Like you totally could just play chords with certain kinds of synths, certain setups, certain ways, certain kind of FM and timing and phasing and whatever, and it would just sound like this. And that is how that's what's gonna happen. Like the next kind of Philip Glass types are gonna be people who didn't know, or rather, even if they did know, they just thought of a new way to do it. They're just kind of like, yeah, that's what that effect does, but I could just do that on purpose. And like, you just write a song, and is when you're thinking to yourself, oh, this is where that texture would go, instead of just doing the technical effect that creates it, you just brute force make it happen. That the Philip Glass issing. I could just read that guy's biography or something and find out if anything I just said was true or not, but I like living in a world where my guesses sound cool. But maybe y'all should not take my word for that, just saying. On the rest of the demo, I was mostly commenting on how much like either this was a really nicely cleaned up kind of time stretch situation, or this was a texture that you arrived to inspired by it at least, or not. Or maybe that just occurred to me because that's what it sounded like to me. Like, that's the weird thing about all of this. It's really difficult to translate the communication just through the song. But is that what we're trying to do? Maybe not. I don't know if I ever have. The rest of this was also, I kind of don't want you to change anything about this. This especially was a wonderful little look at a concept of an intro as a training. As like a textual sort of split. But this does actually serve a purpose. From an introductory training perspective, like because if you look at this, you think of the music. Like none of the music is present here, unless this is just a time stretch version of it, like Inception style. But other than that, there's not it. It doesn't really have a thought going for it. But you notice how like the kind of darker color here is just a bit of an inverse of this. Like this area is lit up and there's not much happening, and then now this area is dark and then this area is lit up. This feels away, and this is why I kind of didn't want anything to change. I could thought, like technically speaking, especially hearing and feeling the rest of it kind of moving forward, like when this stuff kind of blended together, the mix wasn't as much fun. But the reason why this was just super fun was because by the time this all got up here and got away, like we had been made to feel a height here, and then we came down, and on which we came down into was smooth. And it was just really cool. It helps that the thing was really cool. That as a thing that happened was just really just super neat. So that's something that you can do. Like this is a bit of the subversion method again, where we're sort of like when you grab a nail and you rub it on a piece of metal really hard in one direction for a while, you kind of magnetize it to have a certain reaction, and then you give it the opposite thing, and it really wants it. It really is like, yes, wow, I can see that super clearly now, like that, because you just got really used to this. So even though this rhythmically and melodically doesn't have a whole lot common, other than like maybe the chord structure and like harmonic stretch is still basically what's happening, the textural presence is the thing that this trained that we eventually used to drop from, kind of literally, and that's kind of neat. Breathe, lungs. Talking a lot without taking a breath. Oh boy, it's not a day if I'm not doing that. Okay. It's a day that ends in Y. Coming up next, we have Unstable Connection by Kusoro. I almost a little think I played this already. Wow, that's bright. Okay. Woo! This feels like actual fires of Mount Doom. It looks a little bit like detonating like lava flow just from here. That's yikes. I'm so ready for what this is gonna feel like. Let's do this, guys.
The computer technology has been moving in a way that nothing else people have ever known. Digital communication system. What are you doing? Do it. People have ever known. Make it up. Do it. What are you doing? Interconnect each of the computers. Make it up. Do it. What are you doing? technology has been moving in a way that nothing else people have ever known. The digital communication system.
That was so many sound effects. That was so many. And what was this? This felt like it was something, but it was so a thing. Like it went off and on at like exactly not a time that I am lost to know what that was. But I could have just been the nature of the very odd time nature of this track, which is cool. Like this is neat to see a track do some 5/4s and other stuff. Although you did a little fall into the trap of what happens when you do tracks like this, which is that you sounded like Mission Impossible. And a little, that's the only reason I actually figured out as fast as I did that the timing that would work. Am I counting it? Like I'm counting, I'm like, going on with the beat here, and then all of a sudden, do. Then it's kind of like, oh, okay. That's fine. You know, like, there's only so many ways one can root note and minor third, but that's like the one, like if I ever sit down and try to make a track using 5/4 as a tempo, there's two things that I focus on. One is that it doesn't sound like Take 5 by Dave Brubeck. And two, that I don't make it sound like Mission Impossible. So like that's the things, because that's just like, those are the two, like the easiest things to do, like the easiest ways to make a 5/4 feel right. But and like the fact that there aren't so many like easily that come to mind is a little bit, says a bit like what else does work, right? So that's the challenge, though. That is the way. But everything else about this was neat. This was just chock full of stuff, though. Like I don't know that this is necessarily like a purpose to the vocal calls. Although I'm not necessarily anti-vocal, but I am kind of like vocal. I'm meh vocal in general. Like a vocal's got to be something for me to be like, oh. And vocal hits and chops and stuff as rhythms are cool. I personally like to fill that particular void with other stuff, but like they're good as long as I like have them. And some of these felt like that could have been what they are, but the rest of them just kind of were there too. It was sort of like you were gonna have vocals, but you filled up every beat a vocal would have had with a shout of some kind. Also, a really fun list of sound effects. Like I'm not gonna knock some of that. That was kind of unexpected, which is good, I guess, in a book of this sort of thing. I'm gonna say my book. I don't really know what a book of this sort of thing means in any of that context. Jeez, what time is it? It's past midnight. It's Thursday. And it was time for me to do a viewer track review video, which we're doing. Yeah. Good track in general. The sub was solid. Wow, I say that and I'm wrong completely. Like, well, okay. It was solid in the sense that there wasn't a lot of competition done to begin with, but there could have been. And on top of that, though, I did like the like kind of trotty sections and the way that it played with the bass. Like this kind of trot bass was sweet. That place was solid. And in fact, if it didn't come out and it wasn't damaged, although this was so like loud for what this was, it probably didn't need to be this loud, which is a weird thing for me to say about anything, but that's the truth. I don't know. It's mostly actually I say I don't know that here I am, but explain it. I know completely. It's a question of transient impact. If you can get away with having an impact that is sort of the louder type without being as loud, that's actually better. Not just from like a average concern of like level amount. It's just sort of like a health thing. You don't really want to be listening to loud stuff all the time. So the more that we can make it feel like we are without actually making us, that's better. It also helps us to be able to do more things at once. But overall, the consideration is like all that compression timing stuff I'm always bringing up and like distorting the math, which you're doing a lot of. But when I say that this doesn't need to be this loud, I mean mostly it doesn't need to have the consequence. It doesn't need to be this saturated and bright in this way. But it does need the transience it gets by being this way. So the job is to try and bring it down while keeping that going. And that usually involves a matter of timing and automation and whatnot that I tend to advocate for. But musically speaking, this was very complicated and very like put together well. So neat and good beat. And still, was this on purpose? Like, it's exactly like, it's not with the beginning or end of a beat, which makes me feel like that was the intention, which really sold it if your goal was to be like as out as possible. Which is a neat kind of like strange interdimensional concept, but I don't know how many music listeners are into that. Again, I guess, though, if you're into listening to kind of this or sort of off-time stuff, this is actually probably the best thing ever. So, considerations. Anyway, coming up next, we have Endless by Stalefish. Okay, this looks like it has some amount of dynamics. That was a hiccup. Let's bring it up. And that is a lot of silence at the beginning there. Or maybe I just zoomed in way too far. Let's find out.
Cease your endless travel.
It did, in fact, have an end. Had more of an end than most things. Alright, so this track was fun because this is a pretty much point perfect, like, technical description of this kind of drum and bass. If someone were to like have the Dr. Manhattan ability to be able to just communicate an idea of like, what is this? Like this would be that in the head. Be like, this is this kind of genre. This is the most in the middle this ever. Which is good because it means you who made this, Stalefish, like you heard the parts right. Which sounds like not a difficult thing to have done, but a lot of people do have this problem. Like, I still have this problem. Like, if a thing is complicated enough, I will start to associate certain parts of things with other things as being part of the wrong thing. And then when I go and try and recreate it with an element that wasn't originally in it, I'll either just have made my job harder, or I just won't be able to do it. So an ability to know what the different parts are and your ability to be able to substitute them with the things that are those things is a huge step. It's a huge, ridiculous requirement of making any of this any kind of accessible or easy ever. The rest of it, though, is like having the technique to actually bring it together. Now, when I was at this stage, after I had run through trying to do a lot of things the wrong way, what I then discovered is that what felt like the right call was to be like, okay, well, if I know what the parts are, but I have a really hard time picking the right sounds, then I need to know how to turn the sounds I have into the right sounds. I need to know how to go from like whatever thing is to be what it needs to be. And I'm only mostly assuming that you're not hitting your target, just out of a projection on my part from how I felt when I did stuff like this. So like for example, your lead moments here, this guy, he's got a quality in him. On top of the mix in this track, by the way, like a big part of this is sort of leveling choices, but a lot of that is somewhat, again, part of that association of the parts and what texture comes from what and how. And the tricks, like, because there's tricks for, like, some pretty just standard stuff we do to make a thing even be able to be this loud. Like, we discussed a couple of them in the previous track. But I wanted to bring up here is this thing's sliding nature. What's interesting about it is that it is very specific and special. So special, in fact, that it at some points gets kind of old. But not all the time. And how often does that happen to you? When you make a sound, you put it in there and you have a whole line, very long line. And it's not so much that it doesn't work. It's just that it doesn't always work as well as it does. And your sort of life up to here, unless you like made the sound and got here. Although this will be true when you're also making stuff, but it's just the whole game of like choosing the thing that is the most what works and the least what doesn't. The professional version of that is still that is the thing. It's still actually just rooting and rifting through, just rifling through presets until something like works, or you just start there and you work backwards so that it isn't boring and weird. It's because everything else fits it. And I'm bringing that up because the assumption that you should be able to know how to get from like whatever this is to the next bit comes with a sort of like, okay, well, it's sort of like how you know how to be a bodybuilder. You know how to go to the gym and do all of that. It's just that for a whole lot of reasons, you probably aren't going to. Current pandemic conditions being one of them, but also maybe you don't want to devote your life to that kind of thing. But you know that you could, and you know that's what you would need to do to make exactly that kind of like cut above the rest thing happen. And in moments like these, you already know what you need to do. You know that this needs to be a moment by moment consideration for all these notes and all these slides. And sometimes that's an in preset consideration. That was something that was really cool about Massive when it was new, was that it had that sequencer element to it that you could attach to things, and you could have moments like something that would happen every note, but it would change. So you wouldn't have the same slide setting in every note, but it would still do it every once in a while, so that it could be the right kind when it was the right kind, and then the normal kind otherwise. But in situations like this, when it's like not really, like I don't know what plugin you're using to do it, but if that wasn't a plugin that could do something like that, then your other way of doing it is to just have another one, or to manually yourself be the one that's in control of the sequence of the one element. And I'm bringing, so I brought that up because there's a certain extent of like, if you do want to get from point A to point B, and you're looking for the kind of big grand stuff technique, because that's a little bit what you've done so far to get where you are. You've identified, okay, kick universe, sub, this kind of bass, this sort of sound, and like you identify, and you get like, that's this in this track, so now I'm doing this in this track. But getting the rest of the way to like the more complicated versions of those is mainly just that there were choices that were made that were more than that. And I'm not being vague. That's the actual only requirement, that you just pick a divergent path and just try and find one that A, hasn't been done before, and B, doesn't sound like shit. That's pretty experimental, and also sort of like historical knowledge based. Like, you just know that certain things aren't going to work because either you've done them or you've heard them, and then you don't do them. You try to do other stuff until you find the unique coolness that you can work into something that can then be mixed into the cool beat. So that's not to say none of this in here isn't that. Like, this track could totally survive with the content that it is, because all the things that need to do the jobs there are all being done, which was why it was really good that you could tell what all the parts were. But the rest of it is mixed stuff. And just to sort of go off the top, the kick and snare need to be the two loudest things that are in the track, like visibly leveled. that way. Like that lead being piercing, like you wanted, I feel like I could tell the sort of presence you were going for, and that's not a power thing. That sort of like wide hit up there that feels like, okay, there's presence at this range, and there feels like it's at this range but harder. What could that mean besides make it louder? And that's sort of what saturation is about. We describe saturation as this multiplied process, but what you can think of it as is if I took a real thin band of frequency. This is not representative frequency. I'm just making a thin representation. Like if I had an EQ band, actually, this is used to make an EQ band. What's wrong with me? Thin EQ band to actually enable any of them, because I had disabled them all so that they wouldn't get in the way. Which one do you use the peak type? There you are. Where's the node? Right there. All right. If you distort a signal like this, what'll happen is that behavior up in the spectrum will be represented, but that's only because higher frequencies happen faster than lower frequencies, which means the representation of the effect is going to edge high. But it doesn't mean that that effect isn't happening in a width kind of way. In a literal sense, what saturation is that a sharp thing becomes a wide thing. And when it comes to the nature of the sound that we're discussing in this track here, the sharp thing is this. It's this note, kind of like these very sharply noticed harmonics. And then saturating them means spreading them. But if you were to just distort this naked signal, what you get is what you got here. You have what you're doing. But when you may have attempted what it sounds like is happening, which is to use supersaw stuff to get that kind of blurred, Nord lead texture. Isn't it weird that I use that word? But what it actually is FM. FMing this as a tone, but not really like at the right tone. It's FMing it in a way that spreads it, that's not harmonic, so that there's action between the harmonics, and that's what causes it to feel like it's bigger than it is, which would be devastating if we were doing that to a bass. It wouldn't sound right at all. It'd be gross. But because it's a lead, it's really high frequency. That's just what it sounds like, a spread kind of noised experience, and not this piercing, extremely sharp one, which is what you have. And I think you went there attempting to go there, the other way. Maybe. Shit ton of projection I just gave you there. I basically just tried to teach me how to make this better 10 years ago. So I hope any of that helped. Yes. Good job today, y'all. I hope anything I said helped at any kind of capacity. Thanks for sending these in. Y'all want to send them any your tracks to be featured in these videos, head on down to the Discord that's in the description of this video, where there is a channel for submission. You just put in your track, you just load it up in there. Any way they can be downloaded, and then I randomly select 7 of them to be picked when it is time to do it. Excuse me. If you have any questions about that or anything else, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as usual, have a nice day.